So it looks like we have a quorum and everyone, I believe, is on. So good evening, everyone. This is the May 6th, 2021 meeting of the East Long Meadow Community Preservation Committee. In attendance, Francis, Lynn, Brian, I see Tom. I believe Ralph was on earlier. And I think also Tony is on as well. So we have 7 out of 8.
Great.
I believe. So at this point, is anybody in the audience recording the meeting at this time? If so, please indicate at this point in time. Okay, Allison, you are recording. All right. So, so we make note of that. And okay, so moving on to the next topic, we will have the approval of the April 8th, 2021 meeting minutes. I sent these out about a day or two ago. The only revision that that I saw in them, everything looked great. Just Melanie's last name, Akobe. I'll put that into the meeting minutes. So we'll do that. Does anybody else have any other revisions to those minutes that they would like to offer? Hearing none, do I hear a motion to approve the April 8th, 2021 meeting minutes?
Yeah. I'm just gonna eat real quick.
Oh, okay.
I'll make the motion.
Never mind.
Okay, Lynn made the motion. Brian, you want to second it?
I'll second it. That's fine.
Okay, fantastic. Yes. Yes. All right, so going on a order of roll call, I'll go from top to bottom here. Francis?
Yes, I'm here.
Lynn?
Yes.
Brian?
Yes.
Tom?
Yes.
Tony?
Yes.
Okay. And I am a yes as well. I'm assuming I did not miss anybody. I saw Ralph earlier, but I do not see him in our panelists or attendees right now. Okay, with that, we'll continue to go down the list here to our next agenda item, that being a presentation by Stuart Sagadar from the CPC Coalition. Stuart was here back in February to give us a little presentation on CPC for some of the newer members that wanted to learn more about what CPC was, kind of the ins and outs of it. So I believe this presentation will be more centering on bonding. So in some of the very kind of larger projects that the CPC can have that they may approve, you can bond out projects that are quite large in scope. So, Stuart, I'm not sure if you can hear us, but we'll.
Yeah, I can hear you. So I just need you to make it so that I can share my screen with you.
Okay, I think.
I just did.
Oh, just did. Okay, so.
You can. So the answer to that question. A question about not being on video or being on video. So I'll tell you that when we rebroadcast this, the names that are visible to you now in Zoom do not get recorded. And so you just show up as a anonymous cutout silhouette. So it does make it easier for people at home to see who's talking if you're on video. So that's always the preference, is to have your video on if there's not a particular reason that you can't. Thanks.
Yeah, so that would be ideal. So yeah, if you're able to do that, if you're not able to do that, though, that is totally understandable. But
Mr. Mackey, does that impact the presentation quality?
I don't think it should. I think he just stepped into the other room. But no, I do not think that that impacts the quality.
Tom, I believe it's only if you're the one presenting that it would impact. So you can leave your video on and it doesn't impact it.
Thank you, Francis.
You're welcome.
So Stuart, I think we're ready. I think you should be able to share your screen now.
No, I actually don't have a video button or a button to be able to share a screen. So.
Okay. Who can?
Now, I came in through that public link that was on the agenda.
Uh,
Yeah, that's the problem.
okay, how about now?
Nope.
Okay. All right. Let me just figure something out here. Okay, hold on one moment.
Sorry about that.
No problem.
Yeah, you should have access to screen sharing. It doesn't let you?
No, I don't have access to turn on video either. I just have audio.
Huh.
But he just said that he came in through the agenda link and not through the.
Yeah, he's been promoted though to a panelist, so he has all the privileges of a panelist. Let me switch this off and turn it back on again. See if that. That make any difference?
No.
Well, this is a new one on me.
Do you want me to sign off and come back, try
Yeah.
coming back in?
Try that. Yeah, I think that's the next step. Thanks.
Okay. All right, let me do that.
Okay, so we will wait the power of technology.
There he is.
There we go.
Okay.
Okay, great.
All right. So let me get the presentation
Wonderful.
and start that. All right. Can folks see that?
Looks perfect.
Okay, great. And folks can hear me okay too. All right. Well, thanks for having me back. Jonathan said you were interested in learning a little bit more about using your CPA fund to bond projects as opposed to paying for them with money you already have in the bank. And that's a really popular thing in CPA across the state. We have almost 100 municipalities that have CPA that have bonded at least one project. 261 different projects have been bonded. So that tells you that some communities have bonded 2, 3, 4, even 5 different projects, depending upon the community. So it is really popular. We've had over $400 million in projects that have been bonded. Typically, the things you see communities bond for are obviously major projects. So acquiring a piece of open space land or land for a housing development or land for a recreational development is probably the #1 reason why folks bond with their CPA funds. Another would be to do a major building rehabilitation in the historic category. And then the last one that we see a lot of is communities that are doing a very large recreational complex, the construction costs for that, or rehabilitating a very large recreational complex, the costs for doing that actual construction work. So when you bond under CPA, it is a general obligation bond of the town. So the town does have to pay it back. There's no free lunch. The revenue stream is being issued against your, the bond is being issued against your future CPA revenue stream, but the town is obviously on the hook for paying that back. The state and your bond counsel, which is a special attorney that communities use when they are bonding, a special lawyer. Bond counsel in the state will only let you bond what you can pay back from your local surcharge. So just the surcharge that is on the tax bills in East Longmeadow, called the local funding of CPA, is what you can bond against. Of course, you receive a match from the state every year. That can be used for other projects, but it's the local surcharge that they will let you bond against. Now, because obviously the state funding is an uneven funding source. It goes up and it goes down. So you need something steady to bond against, which is that local surcharge. One thing I always like to point out to folks is that it does ratchet up the level of approval you need at your town council to get the project passed. Normally, a CPA project would only require a majority vote of the council, but it does require a 2/3 vote to pass when bonding is involved. The vote at your CPC to recommend the project, that's still a majority vote. But once it gets to the council, if the council is voting on a project where you have recommended bonding, that's going to take a 2/3 vote of the council. So, you folks are doing some planning right now in terms of updating your CPA plan. I believe we had talked about last time that needs some updating. Always a good idea to do, planning ahead with CPA and what the needs are of the community. But as part of that planning, you also kind of want to set the groundwork now for a future bond. You may never use it, but it's always good as part of your planning process to know what kind of capacity you have to bond. What kind of large projects could we take on? And what is the amount we could cover in a bond based on our current revenue? So that's something that obviously the CPC members can't do themselves. You're going to have to meet with the financial officials of the community, and maybe as part of your updating of the CPA plan, one member could be responsible to kind of work on this with the town. And one of the things that can be helpful is to ask them to create what I call a bonding capacity spreadsheet. And it basically shows you what kind of bond you could issue in the future for a large CPA project. And that will change every year because interest rates change, right? It all depends how much you can afford to bond, depends upon the current interest rates, just like a mortgage would. And your revenues go up every year too, usually. So it's definitely something that would need updating periodically. Now, we have a format for a bonding capacity spreadsheet that I'll show you right here. This came from one of our communities, and we can send it to you actually in a spreadsheet form, which, John, if you want, you just nod your head if you want that. He's nodding his head. Okay, good. I will send that to you right after the meeting by email. So this is just a snapshot of it. The one I'm sending you actually has all the formulas in it and everything like that. But it shows what this community could do with a bond. So I'll step through the column that says 2008, which was the year that they asked their financial officials, hey, how much could we, if we want to buy a piece of open space, how much open space could we afford to buy? So the first thing on the first column, that $525,000, that is the amount of local revenue that this community takes in every year. And you can see they project that up in future years. In 2009, it goes up a little bit. Usually your local money goes up by a little bit every year. Now, when you're bonding and doing this, let's say this is for an open space bond that they were looking at. You can't bond that full $525,000. You can't say we're going to do a project and pay $525,000 every year in debt service to pay back that bond, because you still have to set aside 10% for historic preservation and 10% for community housing, right? And you also probably are going to want to set 5% aside for administrative costs. So in this case, that was $131,000. So the amount of money on an annual basis that the town could put toward debt service on this bond was $393,750. Now, the next line down, they already had a bond. Talk about communities that, have bonded more than once. This community had already bonded for other projects, and they owe $256,000 a year as an annual debt service. So that left $135,550 in their revenue stream that they could pay toward a bond. So with that figure, Down in yellow, the town treasurer or the finance director, it depends upon which community the bonding authority goes to, but in this case, it was the treasurer, checked on the bond and determined what type of open space that would buy. So the current interest rate you see down there in red back then was 4.5%. It's definitely lower now, which is why it is a good time to bond municipal projects. Municipal bond rates are always lower than you and I could get for a mortgage, but they're particularly low right now because general interest rates are low. So it is a good time to take on debt if there's a project that you need to do, as opposed to maybe putting it off into the future. So the bond at this point was, the interest rate was 4.5%. They were going to do a 20-year bond. So it turned out that that $135,000 would buy a $1.79 million bond for 20 years. So this community, if they had a piece of open space that they were looking to bond, could afford a $1.79 million piece of open space, and they would pay that back at the rate of around $135,000 every year for debt service for 20 years, and then the bond would be paid off, the principal and interest. Any questions on this at all? Does that make sense? All right, so that's something that you folks can do. Now, when you ask for, when you actually have a project in front of you and you're debating whether to bond it or not, you're going to, again, need to work pretty closely with your municipal officials, your finance director, and your treasurer, because you want to know that figure of how much you can bond each year and what the debt service would look like. So they can do what's called, a debt service projection sheet. And this is for a different community that was going to do a couple of land purchases. And knowing what the total cost is and the current interest rate, the town officials can print out a spreadsheet that will show you how much that bond is going to cost every single year in terms of debt service. So, once you bond, obviously, starting the next year, you're going to have to pay it back year by year. And this chart shows you how much money that would cost on your budget every year. And that's important to know because you're doing planning. You want to know how much money you have for other projects. You're going to want to have, a spreadsheet like this showing you, if you bond this project, what the debt service is going to be for every single year. All right, so moving on, and feel free to jump in anytime, by the way, if you have questions. I don't mind doing this interactively. I mentioned the term of the bond. In the last case, they were looking at a 20-year bond. And back when they were looking at a 20-year bond in 2008, that was the maximum under state law that you could bond in Massachusetts for municipalities. 4, 5, 6 years ago, the state changed that and now allows communities to go up to 30 years. The length of the bond depends upon what you're bonding for, the asset that you're bonding for. So if a town is buying a new police car, they're not going to let you issue a 30-year bond because that police car is not even going to last 30 years. So there is a schedule in Chapter 44, which is the state's bonding law, that shows the type of assets that you might be bonding for and what the term of the bond could be. Most things that you would bond for a CPA project would be 30 years. Buying land, you can bond up to 30 years. Doing a rehabilitation of a historic building, building an athletic complex, all those things are big capital projects and they are available to go up to 30 years. And this is something that you would talk about with the municipal officials, right? The longer you go on a bond, the less you'll have to pay every year and the more money you'll have for other projects. But just like a mortgage, the longer you go on the bond, the more total interest you're going to pay in the end. So there's sort of a sweet spot there. And that bonding capacity spreadsheet, you might ask your municipal officials, well, we want to buy this piece of open space or build this recreational facility. Please show us what the cost would be each year if we bonded for 10 years, 20 years, and 30 years. You can ask for different terms because that affects how much money you have to spend on other projects. And once you make a determination, when you recommend that project to the council, you really want to lock in that term. You want to specify in your recommendation how long you are recommending this project be bonded for. And we had a community once that left that out. And if you leave out the exact term of the bond that you would like, then it's up to the municipal officials after the council votes to determine it themselves. And in this particular case, everyone was talking about 20 years, and all the projections showed how much money the CPC would have for other things, and that's why they chose 20 years. But lo and behold, they didn't specify it in their recommendation. It wasn't specified in the article that was voted on at the legislative body. And the treasurer in this case, to save a little money for the town, bonded for 13 years. So when the debt service came around for each of the next 13 years, it was a lot higher than the CPC had anticipated, and they had very little money for other projects because the bond was less, so therefore the annual payments were higher. It saved some money in interest, but it also handicapped the CPC. And you folks are really in charge of your own planning and your own budget and your priorities, so you really want to lock in that term ahead of time by looking at different bonding capacity in different scenarios and determining as a group what you would like to do and putting that into your recommendation.
Sure.
Yes.
Just to clarify, this is Tom K.
Hi, Tom.
A clarification point. When it comes to bonding, you mentioned athletic facility. Can you clarify athletic facility, like restrooms, that kind of thing, please?
Sure. CPA is limited to outdoor recreational facilities. Excuse me. So anything outdoors is the first qualification, and it has to be a capital improvement. So things that are affixed to the land. So you can't buy the balls, let's say, that communities use, or the bats, or the equipment, or batting cages, those movable batting cages, and anything that's sort of portable and falls into the area of equipment, that's not eligible. It's capital improvements that are affixed to the land. And beyond that, the only prohibition with CPA in the recreation category is in the definition of land for recreational use. It says no gymnasiums, stadiums, or similar structures. So, CPA is for open space activities. Recreation is actually a subset of the open space definition, the same definition that talks about conservation land and fields and forests and farmland and wetlands and land for recreational use. So it's things that are in as close as possible to their natural state. So parks, playgrounds, athletic fields, trails, community gardens, those are the things actually mentioned. But we've had lots of other things. We've had pickleball courts, tennis courts, outdoor basketball courts, outdoor skateboard parks, and things like that. In terms of actual buildings, really the only thing that DOR that we've seen them opine, the Department of Revenue, is an outdoor bathroom facility, an outdoor, like a storage shed for equipment, maybe even a snack shack. But relatively small, modest structures where no recreational activity is going on inside the structure. The structure is there to directly serve the outdoor recreational need. So we had one community, Newton, who wanted to build a bathroom facility at their town beach, which is fine. But then they asked the Department of Revenue, well, can we put a multi-purpose in the room in there with a kitchen? So that when it rains, the kids from the summer camp can go in and, do arts and crafts in the multi-purpose room and have, a picnic in there or something. And DOR said no, because that's a building. That's something where it's like a gymnasium where activities are happening inside the structure, and CPA is not for structures. Does that help?
No, that clarifies, because I think there's a lot of misconception about whether restrooms can be used or not for outdoor recreational facilities.
Yeah, it is a common misconception. And we all wish that the CPA legislation came with an exact list of what you can and can't do. But maybe, it's not really good to wish for that, because sometimes that handicaps you as well, too. So, there is no exact list, but through, opinions from the Department of Revenue, and 20 years now of history, it's become pretty clear. And that summary there is really, and we have an article on our website in the technical assistance section under the recreation category that kind of summarizes everything I just said.
Thank you very much.
No problem. All right, so now you're looking at your CPC level of doing a project, and you're working on your recommendation, the vote that you're going to take at your meeting. And there are some things that you should put in your recommendation, and make sure that the order that is sitting in front of the town council when they vote includes some certain things. So first of all, the order has to mention at the council that this bond is being done under authority of Chapter 44B. 44B is CPA, and in order to pay back a bond with CPA funds in the future, the bond has to be specifically issued under the CPA program. So if the council voted a bond on a project using another funding source, and then came to the CPC later and said, oh, we should have asked you guys to approve this, it's too late. So once that bond vote is taken at the council and they have authorized the bond and not done it authorized under community preservation, Chapter 44B, CPA can't pay back any of that bond. So it has to be recommended by you, and the vote at the council has to specify that it's being bonded under CPA, Chapter 44B. There are costs to issue a bond, and this is why you don't do it for small little things. You have to get a special attorney called the bond counsel. Most towns have a bond counsel that they work with already because they bond for all sorts of things like police stations and road projects and fire trucks and that sort of thing. So your town undoubtedly has a specialized bond counsel. But there's a lot of expenses to issuing that bond. They have to get a rating on the bond. They have to go out to market. They have to do a lot of legal work on it. So it can run, even $30,000 in just fixed costs to issue a bond. And some of those costs are variable depending upon the size of the bond. Some of them are fixed. So, if a lot of those expenses are fixed, you can see why you wouldn't go out to market on a $50,000 bond. You're going to spend, close to that in expenses. So that's why it's for large things. You don't have to, obviously we talked about the bond term. Oh, one last thing I wanted to mention about the miscellaneous costs. Those expenses of issuing the bond are eligible to be funded under CPA. And in fact, you should. You don't want to stick those expenses into the town's regular budget. So if you need $1 million to buy this piece of land, or to build this recreational facility, or to rehab this historic building like Upton did with their town hall in the picture here, if you need $1 million, you're going to want to get an estimate from your municipal officials of those additional costs, find out what they're going to be, and then the CPC is going to vote to authorize those expenses as well. So you're going to ask the council to approve an appropriation of $1,050,000, let's say. $1 million for the bond and $50,000 in miscellaneous costs that you're going to pay for out of CPA. Now, if it's $1 million project, you don't have to use just one funding source. So if you have $250,000 in your account that you want to use for that project, you can recommend that you use the $250,000 you have on hand and bond for the $750,000 plus expenses. So you can mix and match funding sources like that in a bond. The great thing and the most important thing about CPA and bonding under CPA is a council vote is the final step. It does not have to go to the ballot. Most things that the town bonds for, especially large bonds, because of our Prop 2.5 law in Massachusetts, haven't you heard of Prop 2.5? Most of those bond expenses would be above 2.5% year-to-year increase. And so therefore the council has to say yes, and then it goes to the ballot and the voters have to say yes. So you probably had, votes to build a new school, for example, or to rehab a building, the fire station or something like that, that the whole town gets to weigh in and vote on. But with CPA, you've already had your ballot election. When East Longmeadow adopted CPA, they authorized a revenue stream for CPA. And what are you at, John? Is it 1% or 1.5%?
I believe it's 2, but I'm not 100% sure. If that's
One.
It's
1?
1%.
1%.
Thank you, Tony. I knew Tony. I should have asked Tony. Tony's been around, so he remembers it. Thank you, Tony. So it's a 1% revenue stream. So the town has already had a ballot election and voted that 1% surcharge for CPA. You're bonding under that 1% future revenue stream. So you've already had your ballot election. You don't have to go back to the ballot. It's just a CPC recommendation and the council vote. Does that make sense to folks? Any questions on that? All right. So now the bond is been recommended by you and also by the council. One thing that is kind of a neat little thing that can really help the town is they can combine different projects into one bond. So when the town goes out to market to sell this bond and issue it, they can combine your $1 million CPA project with any other bond that they have to issue for general municipal things. So for example, my town was buying a piece of open space back when I was chair of the CPC at spring town meeting. And it passed town meeting, passed the CPC and passed town meeting. But the town held off on issuing that bond because they knew that in the fall, there was going to be another town meeting to vote on a brand new police station. And as long as the term lines up, in this case, both were going to be 20-year bonds, they can then, after the town meeting vote on the police station, then they can go out to market and get one bond for the police station and the CPA project. And you share the expenses. So some of those expenses to issue a bond, like I said, are fixed expenses. And the larger the bond, sometimes you can get a better interest rate too. So it does make sense, and the CPA law encourages the town to think about this and possibly combine a CPA project and a non-CPA project in a bond. You would only pay back your portion. So if the bond was, a $2 million bond, $1 million for CPA and $1 million for a town project, you would pay 50% of the expenses for that, issuing that bond. And then every year, 50% of the debt service would get charged to the CPA budget and 50% would get charged to the general fund. So that's really not something that the CPC has to worry about, but it is something that you can talk to your municipal officials about because you might be able to help each other out by planning. And that's why the planning is so important. Every year now, once you do the bond, you don't have a payment that first year. That's just the bond authorization. And then the town goes out and borrows the money. You pay it back starting the following year. So you don't have a payment that first year, but you're going to have a debt service every year to pay back that bond. And you'll have that debt service schedule. And you should include that when you make your annual budget recommendation to town meeting every spring. Because it affects, obviously, if you know you have a $150,000 bond payment that year, it affects how much money you have on other projects. So you need to recommend that debt service every year to town council so that it can be paid back. The council could decide they want to pay it back from another source other than CPA. I've never seen that happen, but it is possible. The town could decide to pay back that year's bond from another source. But as I mentioned, it doesn't work in reverse. If the town has already used another funding source to bond something, they can't then use CPA in the future to pay back that debt service. This came up very early in CPA. A community had purchased a piece of open space about 5 years before they had CPA. Then they passed CPA, and it was year 7 of their debt service on a 20-year bond, whatever it was. And someone came up with a bright idea and said, hey, this was a piece of open space. Now we have CPA. Let's get CPA to pay for the debt service from now on. And you can't do that because the bond wasn't initially issued under CPA, didn't mention Chapter 44B, so the town can't use CPA to pay it back. All right, so you do a budget every year, and you know this standard rule with CPA where you have to spend or reserve 10% of your annual funds in each category: historic, open space and recreation, and housing. If your annual debt service on a bond is more than 10% of your annual revenue, that counts as your requirement in that category. So you don't have to then also set aside another 10% for that category because the bond does count. Remember, the rule is that you have to spend or reserve 10% of your annual revenue in each of the three categories every year, and you'd be spending it on your debt service. So that counts. So how does that work in terms of visual? So let's say your community has $100,000 every year in total CPA revenue. The annual funding from your local surcharge and your state match. Yours is obviously much more than that, but for purposes of this example, 100,000 is the revenue. So the town would be required to either spend 10,000 on a historic project or put 10,000 in their historic reserve account, 10,000 in their housing reserve, but they have a debt service on their open space, and it's a $15,000 payment that year. So that counts as their 10% requirement for the open space and recreation category. They don't also have to set aside another 10,000 for open space and recreation. So that's how they would do their budget that year. They would not have a 10% reserve for open space. They could, I mean, if they wanted to set aside some more money in that category, they could at their option, but they don't have to. Any questions on that? Yeah, Tom, I see your hand.
I have a question. Is a memorial / monument park like a veterans memorial? Is that eligible for CPA funding?
It depends upon the land that it's being constructed on.
Okay.
So everything about CPA is land. When you are presented with a CPA project, one of the things you always want to consider is if you were standing on that land and looked down at your feet, what would you see in that land? So if that art sculpture or memorial was on the front lawn of Town Hall, well, Town Hall, which is general municipal land, that's not a CPA eligible category, right? We have historic buildings, open space, recreation land, and housing land. But if that memorial was inside an officially dedicated town park, a park that's under control of the Parks Department, that is protected by Article 97, which is the state's actually it's an amendment to our state's constitution that covers all parkland in Massachusetts, then it probably would be okay to build that memorial. If it was in front of the fire station and it was a memorial to fallen firefighters, that's not a park. That's not recreational land. So you wouldn't really build a memorial on housing in a housing development. You really wouldn't build a memorial in the open space category, conservation land. And in the historic category, you can't build new historic things anyway. So it's really a recreation project. If you were going to build a memorial, and it would have to be in a dedicated recreational park. And you typically find, within a park, the things that are eligible for CPA are typical park-like amenities, lighting, benches, walkways, plantings, athletic courts, and you see memorials and you see statues and you see, artwork inside of real parks, but it has to be on dedicated parkland.
Thank you.
All right. All right. So this question always comes up the first time a community is voting on CPA. And someone's going to ask, I guarantee you, well, by voting on CPA, voting this bond, we're now promising to pay it back for the next 10, 15, 20, 30 years, right? So does that lock us into CPA? Because as you know, communities can change their CPA program at any time by a vote of the council and a townwide vote. So communities can revoke CPA. We've never had a community revoke CPA, but it is possible. So does it take away the right of a community to revoke CPA if you have an outstanding bond? And no, it does not. The community can still vote to revoke CPA. But what would happen at that point? Well, the first thing that would happen is they would take all the existing money that you have in the bank that you haven't spent yet, and they would encumber that to pay off the future debt service. If that wasn't enough, then the surcharge would have to stay on the tax bills. Sorry, that's a typo. It says at the full 3%. In your case, it would be at the full 1%. Sorry about that. You would keep that surcharge on your tax bills, but you wouldn't be able to do any new projects. All that money would go into an account to pay back the bond. And as soon as that account had accumulated enough money to pay back the rest of the bond, then the surcharge would drop off your tax bills. With special permission, you can also keep the amount on the tax bills, but not at the full 1%, but just the amount that would be necessary to pay back that bond every year. So if you have to pay back $100,000 in debt service and your finance department determines that a 0.25% surcharge would bring in enough money to pay that debt service every year, then you would have 0.25% on your tax bills until the bond was paid off, and then it would fall off. This has never happened, because we've never had a community revoked CPA, let alone a community revoked CPA with an outstanding bond. But it is something that people will ask, and people get a little fearful, like, well, gee, what if we don't want CPA in the future? They don't have to keep it, but you do have to pay back the bond. But they could revoke CPA, and that would be the end of the CPA, and it would be the end of any other types of projects. So I promised a short presentation, and that's what I have for you. That is our bonding webinar. And I'm happy, John, to answer any other questions, or if you have to move on with your agenda, whatever it is.
Sure. I'll open it up to the committee. I know there's already been a couple questions. Does anybody have any questions for Stuart? Hearing none. I had a question somewhat related, not necessarily to the subject of bonding, but obviously of another CPC question that sort of has kind of come up. So when a project, so CPC recommends a project, then this project goes, in our case, to the town council. So in the vote, we specify obviously the amount of money, usually obviously what the application is asking for, and then where those funds are coming out of. So it could be one of those four categories. Obviously it wouldn't come from administrative funds. So say we designated it like in category A, but then the council designates it in category B. Is that acceptable, or would we be running into issues because CPC and the council would be deferring on where they recommended it?
Right. I actually spoke with your town manager. She called with the same question earlier this week. So the council ordinarily cannot change the appropriation because you have recommended it with a certain funding source, right? You've recommended a certain amount and all the details of the project. The council's options are to reject that project. They can pass the project, or they can pass the project but give you less money. You've asked for the Taj Mahal of soccer fields, and they only want you, to spend 3/4 of that on the soccer field. So they can approve it at a lesser amount. But any other changes would be, a change to your recommendation. And so that is not allowed. In this case, it seems like, a honest mistake was made. They didn't know that at the time. It was a small project. And it seems like it would have made sense actually to have it come out of the reserve account as opposed to the undesignated fund. So what I recommend is that the CPC, if they are okay with that change, just have a confirmatory vote at your meeting that you are okay with that change. I mean, after all, they could have gone through the whole process of saying, no, we want to change it. We're going to send it back to the committee. And then the committee is going to have to, decide whether they want to change that funding source in order to get it past the council and send it back to us. So, that's a big process to happen. And it's the way it should happen. But in this case, if the committee is okay with it, and it seems to be a change that makes sense, I would just suggest that you just do a confirmatory vote and you should be fine. You will be fine. The reason why it seems to make sense, if I remember the situation correctly, you had recommended taking the money from the undesignated fund, right? And the council changed it to the reserve account. There is sort of a strategy for money management with CPA that the CPC, and this is why you are in charge of your own budget and your planning. As a best practice, we always recommend that communities spend down their reserve accounts first, always. Because the reserve accounts are restricted to that one category. Your undesignated money, that's like, wild card money, right? You can use that on any category. So it's more valuable than money in a restricted account. So if you let money build up in a restricted account, let's say it's the recreation and open space account, and you continually use the undesignated fund for all your recreation and open space projects, and now your, recreation and open space account is built up a lot of money, but you don't have much of the wild card money, much of the undesignated money. And then all of a sudden the slate roof blows off on your most precious historic building in town. And you want to help with the reconstruction of that slate roof. Well, guess what? All your money is tied up in the recreation account, and you can't do a historic project because you've always used your undesignated fund and left the money sitting in the open space account. So it's just a best practice. There's no rules on this. It's not in the CPA legislation. But we recommend that, in most cases, you want to spend down your reserve account first. So it does seem to make sense that in this case, you had the money in your recreation reserve account, and that's what you'd want to use first. And that's why I think the council was thinking that. But that would be really up to the CPC. If you didn't agree with that, then it would have to, probably go back to the council to revote it if you didn't agree. But it seems to make sense. Now, there's reasons you want to build up money in your account. I know there was one community west of Boston that just knew a huge farm was going to come on the market at some point in the next 5 years. The owner was elderly, and he had always talked in his life about wanting the land to be preserved. And so the town really had, deliberately built up a big reserve in their open space and recreation account, specifically for that problem, that opportunity, I should say. And sure enough, it fell on their lap, and they had to act quickly at some point, and they were glad they saved the money in their open space and recreation. So that's why you do a plan, right? These are things that you discuss among yourselves when you do your planning, and you decide, gee, is there a specific reason why we want to build up one of our reserve accounts? And that's okay. Just realize, though, you're taking away a lot of your flexibility. And the other thing I see happen when communities build up their reserve accounts is it becomes a little bit of a political battle, a little bit of a dogfight, where the historic people are gnashing teeth with the recreation people and the housing people, because they all want to protect their piece, and they want to have their pot of money to spend. And that doesn't make a good CPA program. When you have money, big money in these reserve accounts for no particular reason, you take away your flexibility, and you start funding projects that aren't necessarily very good, right? So you get a bunch of projects in the historic category, and you have lots of money in the historic category, but they aren't really great projects. Well, the pressure is going to be on to fund them. Well, we have the money, let's do it. And meanwhile, you don't have any recreation or housing money, and you have a phenomenal housing project sitting there, but you're going to fund all these sort of historic projects that year because that's where the money, has been built up. So those are some of the issues, around the money management of CPA. It's not something you probably think of too often, but there's definitely strategies and unfortunately politics and everything. And the reserve accounts, and when to use the reserve accounts, and how much to let them build up, and what funding sources to recommend is really something you really want to think about. When you do a project, you really want to think about where you're taking that money from.
Yeah, I think that's good to bring up, because we had a discussion about this on a particular project a couple weeks ago, and I heard conflicting differences. So with having you here this evening, I wanted to kind of definitively get an idea of it. So then in the future, not only will I know it, but then it'll be codified, and we'll make sure that when projects come back up again, that they'll be that they'll go through that rule.
Right. And now that this has happened, your town manager knows about it, and the council will know in the future that they can't, change a funding source. If they really feel strongly about it, they would have to kick it back to you. But in this particular one, since, it was just a misunderstanding, and if the CPC is okay with the change that was made, I think a confirmatory vote by your CPA committee at a future meeting makes a lot of sense. And you can talk to your town manager about how to execute that.
Yeah, that'll definitely be something. I probably don't feel, at least personally, comfortable moving forward on that this evening. I kind of want to stomach it and then get maybe committee input.
Yeah.
Before we,
Well, you would want to put that on, you would want to put that on your agenda anyways for a future meeting as opposed to being able to do it tonight.
okay. Tom.
One other question, Stuart. There's some question about maintenance.
Yep. So maintenance has a specific definition in Section 2 of CPA. All the definitions in Section 2 are really the sort of the meat of the law. And there is a definition for maintenance. And conversely, there's also a definition of capital improvement. So CPA is for capital improvements generally, not for maintenance. So you want to make sure that the projects, are not maintenance. Now, some things are, gray area, and you just have to sort of work through those, looking at the definitions and doing your best to figure out, whether it's maintenance or a capital improvement. But CPA can never pay for maintenance nor operating expenses, so you can't cut the grass at a park with CPA funds. You can't pay the insurance bill on a historic building, the liability bill on a historic building. You can't buy the oil for the burner in a housing development, things like that. Operating expenses or maintenance are CPA is a capital improvement program. So you want to look at those two definitions and make sure that you're staying away from any maintenance items.
So,
Stuart,
Yes, Tony.
question. If someone comes forward and they want monies for painting, that would be maintenance, correct?
Well, not necessarily. Painting, see, like I said, there's some things that are a little difficult. Painting is one of those, right? So,
Okay.
If it was a painting project that was, a regularly scheduled painting, every 10 years this building gets painting and it's just, looking kind of tired, and all it needs really is a paint job, that probably
Yep.
is not, is more along the lines of maintenance, honestly. But if it's not a regularly scheduled paint job and there's some other work that needs to be done along with it, or there's a reason the paint failed, moisture is coming in from behind the boards on one side of the building,
Okay.
and they need to fix that problem. Or you're doing a whole bunch of rehabilitation work on the building. Well, of course, you're not going to leave exposed wood when you do that, rehabilitation work. So if painting is associated with another project, that then needs to be painted in the end, you're replacing the rotted trim, or something like that, obviously you need to paint that afterwards. So, like I said, sometimes these maintenance versus capital improvements projects can be a little difficult. You got to just work through those. And if you really, are at loggerheads, then you really just got to ask your town council for a final decision. And painting is one of those that can be tricky, but usually, it comes obviously in the historic category. You're not going to really see painting in any of the other categories.
Correct.
And usually there's other sorts of problems that are going to be fixed as part of that project that go along with the painting. Have we seen communities that say, it's preservation, not painting? Preservation is defined as protecting an asset from injury, harm, or destruction, but not maintenance. So, have we seen some communities say, no, we have to paint this historic building. It's having problems because of the lack of paint, and to preserve it, we have to paint it. Definitely. We've seen communities do that. Not a lot, but it's really a local decision, and the facts of the particular case really will, lean you in one direction or another to make that decision, I think.
Good.
So Stuart, I have a very straightforward question. So if I have a project, the town has a project, and it was a track with a 10-year warranty, okay? And at the same facility, we wanted to put in restrooms and a snack shack. Could that be a combined bonding opportunity? One, does it only have to be 10 years because there's only a 10-year shelf life on a rubber track? Or can it be bonded out for a longer period of time? And can it be coupled together?
Right. That is a great question. That's a bond counsel question. I don't know the answer to that. I don't know. Like I said, there is a schedule in Chapter 44. There is an exact schedule of when things can be bonded for. Like I said, most things with CPA, because CPA is a very land-based program, most things with CPA are 30 years, but there very well may be a schedule for tracks, because they don't last 30 years. But bond counsel is your friend on that question. They're the ones, ultimately, whatever you guys recommend, whatever the council passes, it's not going out to market unless bond counsel reviews it and okays it. So those specific question of what can be married in a bond and what is bondable for what term, those are really questions for bond counsel. I'm not an attorney, and you're not going to see that level of detail in Chapter 44B, which is CPA, which is the law I know. You're going to see those details in Chapter 44, which I know is confusing. That's the state's bonding law. So I don't know the answer to that question.
Which then ties into maintenance. So if a track has a 10-year warranty, is that maintenance?
That's a great question. I don't know the answer. Like I said, these maintenance questions sometimes are difficult to make. So is that maintenance? I don't know. That's really a question for a lawyer to look at, as to whether a track surface that, has reached the end of its useful life, if that can be considered a capital improvement according to the definition of CPA, or is it maintenance according to the definition of CPA? My gut tells me that if you were just repairing certain portions of the track, that would be maintenance. Like a section keeps getting flooded, and so the whole corner section has deteriorated, and that needs to be raised up and fixed. That may be maintenance. Whereas an entire track replacement, digging it up and starting from scratch and doing it over, that might be a capital improvement. But that's really, again, a legal question that I just don't know the answer to.
Yeah. So I think, Jonathan, we have to decide, from a resurfacing versus a whole new track, right? Stuart, one's maintenance, one is CPA.
I don't know if that's true, Tom, honestly.
Maybe it perhaps might be a good idea to get perhaps a legal opinion then.
Yes.
On this case that I think we're all talking about.
Yeah.
At the same time. So that would probably be of interest to both the committee and the council, so that we're not doing anything that is running afoul.
Yep. And there's other things that might be involved in it too. And again, this is why some of these questions are difficult, because they really depend upon the facts of the case. Maybe this track things change over time and they do things very differently. So a track that's worn out, but what they're going to do there next is very different. They're using different materials. It's a different size, or they're adding an extra lane, or they're reconfiguring it so so that corner doesn't flood in the future, whatever. Those things might turn something from maintenance into a capital improvement, because it's very different, and they do, change how they build these things. I know that in our community, this wasn't a CPA project. It was actually before we had CPA, but we had a tennis court that had to be redone. And because, it was one of those concrete ones, that had the big, huge cracks in it and everything. And it was all because the base wasn't done properly. And, I remember I was there when the company came out and they said, "Oh, we don't do things like this anymore. We're taking this thing right down to the dirt and we're rebuilding it from scratch, because we put in drainage now. We do it all completely differently. It was an obsolete facility." So therefore, they were putting back 2 tennis courts in the exact same spot. And afterwards you looked at it and said, "Oh, maybe they just resurfaced it." No, it was, things change, and there was no way to just maintain that track, and resurface it. It needed to be that tennis court rather. So the facts of the case, make this really difficult to answer sometimes. And that's where you got to get your attorney involved.
But this is something that takes time to vet through, correct?
I mean, it can or it can't. It just depends upon what kind of turnaround time the council has. I mean, I've seen some things, get rushed through before town meeting very quickly because the deadline's coming, and there's a lot of energy behind the project. And I've seen other things just go back and forth forever. Because there's politics get in the way as well. And agendas get in the way. So. It's funny. We deal with this at the legislature all the time. We lobby on your behalf at the legislature to make changes that everyone wants to see with CPA, which one of these changes in 2012 was to make these recreation projects possible, to rehab existing recreational facilities. And so this never used to be an issue, Tom, with CPA at all. No one would ever ask, could we, do a new track or fix that tennis court? Because it wasn't even allowed with CPA until we went to the legislature and convinced them that that was what the communities wanted. And so I see the same issue at the legislature too. Sometimes it can take years to get a piece of legislation passed. But then if something catches fire, the legislature in 2 days, has passed a new law, overseeing the Department of Children and Family Services because there was some type of catastrophe, and they immediately came together, House and Senate, quickly, and in 3 days they had a bill on the governor's desk. But other times, like our bill to get more money for CPA took 10 years to get that trust fund raised, and it took 5 years to get that recreation change. So it really just depends.
Yeah, I think from just hearing this conversation, I think, it would be a good idea. So for this was going to be one of the projects I was going to update the committee on. So it did obviously pass, but with that change. So now that we know that rule exists for CPA projects, I think we'll bring it back. We can have a discussion about it at our June meeting. And then in that time period, I hope to then get a legal opinion. So then, if for some reason there's, if we're not on legal standing properly with the project, then that pretty much kind of, unfortunately for the applicant, would disqualify it from the get-go. So does anyone else have any more questions for Stuart? Let me see if there's any raised hands or whatnot. I can see all of you. Seeing none. All right. Well, Stuart, thank you very much for presenting to us. This is very informative. If you'd be able to, send this presentation over, I can pass it along to the committee so the committee can look at it at their own leisure. And this will be also more.
I'll send you the presentation and that bonding capacity spreadsheet that you can work with your municipal officials on.
Yeah, that'll be excellent. Thank you.
All right. Great seeing you all again. Good luck. And we'll follow up by email if anything else comes up.
Excellent.
All right.
Thank you, Stuart.
Thank
Good night.
Okay. All right. So let me get out of here now. And we'll go to what's next on our agenda. So just updating the committee on the different projects that have been approved. So obviously we've talked about the high school resurfacing track already. There was a vote, and then this issue around changing where the source of funding was coming came up. So now what we'll do is we'll kind of go back to the drawing board. That'll be, I'll be meeting with the town's finance director to go over a couple different projects tomorrow. So this will be something that I will bring up in conversation to him to make sure that we're, making sure we can get an answer back to everyone by our June meeting. The council since we last had our meeting also approved the Norcross House, the carriage house, application, and also the pickleball nets. The Pine Knoll Playground was temporarily put on hold. The reasonings that I was told for this ended up happening. The Recreation Department didn't have the resources to commit to it yet. Also, the DPW, which would need to put resources into it as well to kind of lay out the foundation of it, didn't have the resources. So, the other thing is, now that we have a open space master plan that the town adopted not too long ago, we can now go out and get grants. And there was just recently, just this week, I forget the name of it off the top of my head, but a grant that was awarded to us to rehab or to improve trails in the community. So this could go towards brownfield. Tom, you might have a little bit more information on that.
So there is no money involved with that. That is it's basically their expertise to provide. There is no actual monetary.
Okay,
grant.
so sort of it would be, they would help us with technical assistance
Correct.
in developing a plan. Okay. And that could be something, this community looks at. I mean, I know on our topic, on our agenda here, talking about a potential master plan, and we'll get to that. So that could be something we could look at, Tom.
And Chair, I want to recognize Bethany from the planning. She spearheaded that grant, or grant of expertise, I should say. So she did a great job.
It's good. Yeah, no, I think it's really, I think this is a good opportunity. And that's why the part of the reason why the playground project was temporarily halted and the council didn't end up voting on it was they wanted to see if they could get potential grant possibilities to pay for that. What I expressed though was that I hope that we kind of have a decision one way or the other. I think it would not be fair to the applicant or to the project itself that it's sort of out there for a long period of time. I'd like to see some type of resolution. So I'm hopeful there will be some type of resolution, or we'll get kind of some answers in the coming weeks or so. And then the other previously approved projects, we're working on distributing that money now to the approved applicants. So that will be something I will also be working on to make sure is happening when I meet with our finance director tomorrow. That's pretty much the update on the different projects. So they, pretty much were all kind of sent through except for the playground project. Tom?
And Chair, do you need treasurer there?
If you are able to make it, I will be meeting with them at 1. So you are more than welcome to come. Actually, that would be great if you could come. This was sort of something that I've had a personally pretty busy schedule the last few weeks, so which is why I probably haven't gotten back to you all in quick succession as maybe I have in the past. And then trying to figure out his agenda as well. So Tom, actually, that would be great if you could come by. We'll be having that in person.
And where location?
If you want, what?
Location.
Oh, town hall. Or if you want to join via phone, so I mean, I'm fine with going in person personally. So, okay, good. So we'll do that. So then after that meeting tomorrow, we'll have an update for the committee for June. In terms of a master plan, as Stuart was saying, and I've said at probably the last 1 or 2 meetings now, there is a draft coming together. I'm trying to kind of get together different ideas. It's kind of good going through these different projects. It seems like I'm sort of learning a couple different things as we've gone through now, approving a number of applications and seeing the process almost completed on a few of these that just started a couple months or a year last year. So that'll be good, just so that future chairs, future committee members know the rules, maybe know the priorities that we would like to set out for future applications that come forward. So I haven't gotten as much progress on that, unfortunately, because of my busy personal schedule. So I hope to have something more for the committee by June, by our June meeting. Lynn, I see your hand raised.
Yes. I had a question looking at these updates on the applications. The pickleball nets. Stuart mentioned that CPC is really for capital improvements and nothing that can be moved around. So does that mean the nets are a no-go also?
Well, yeah, so I had a discussion with him. He had reviewed the application, but I had heard from him after the council vote. So technically, yeah, we are on shaky ground when it comes to those pickleball nets, unfortunately. So I don't know how we would necessarily go about approaching that, or whether we just kind of do a mea culpa right now and then make sure that this is known for future applicantees. Ralph?
I think Stuart said they built a pickleball court. So would that be?
Yeah, I think what he meant by that was, I think if like the pickleball court was stuck permanently into the ground, affixed permanently into the ground, whereas these nets are portable, so you can move them around. So theoretically, because of that, they would not technically be eligible.
So they should come back and ask for a court.
I know. I think that is something in their long-term thinking, that they would like to eventually develop this. And I think it's a great thing. I think it's a good addition to the community, and it seems like people are, using pickleball courts. As, a few of the people that came forward to us. But perhaps that could be something we'll just make sure in the future that, we are careful of that. Thankfully, it's not a massive cost. It's an extremely small project. But any type of money, we want to make sure that, we are on proper ground when it comes to it. Lynn?
Yes, I'm just thinking as you're speaking that, if it does go through and people know about it, then other people are going to apply. So it is kind of shaky ground.
Very.
Yeah, it would sort of be, well, and we can have this kind of discussed at our next meeting, whether we would want to reconsider things. Obviously I do understand, I understand that point, because setting a precedent, you have to be careful about, well, if this project happens or it happens at this point in time, then why can't it happen, later or down the road? So no, I hear you on that. I think that's something we should consider. But I'd like to see what the rest of the committee feels on that, how they would want to kind of move on that for our next meeting.
I'm
France.
sorry, are you asking that now, or?
Well, probably kind of, this is more of a discussion at this point, because we're talking about all these
Right.
applications. I don't know, how would the committee feel about this project? Technically, as we now know, just from hearing from Stuart,
Okay,
this.
So that's what I was going to say, that I feel like since we've just had this training, some of us are new and we're reviewing things. We should tell the members of the community like, for example, the pickleball nets, for example, the resurfacing. Once we find out for sure that maybe those are not eligible projects, we can just let them know that because we had this new training, we had to review things and we're sorry, but, and then not go forward with things like that in the future. Because I had my doubts about both of those projects, but now it's really clear. And we need to be more careful. That's all.
Yeah, and I think this just heightens the need to just put a master plan, because it kind of explains these things. And I can send the committee this master plan that I've been looking at. The town of Acton put together this really detailed, really expertise. It went through, you would need quotes at this certain price level of a project. This is the exact process. This is the exact, you have to follow this specific time period. So this would be really, maybe, you guys can all take a look at it, see what you think. But I think this could be a really model for this community, because then, future committee members, future chairs will kind of, by reading through the entire document, will know a lot of these questions that we're sort of, kind of figuring it out. Because right now we don't really have a lot of that locally. The only stuff that we have is we tell the applicants, there's a few questions we ask them. They need to provide pictures. Obviously, will the community be able to benefit from it? It's just a common question that we would, need to make sure for vetting it. But there is just not a lot of rules when it comes to vetting. So we're operating on really no local rules. So by having this master plan or this framework in place, then we'll have all these rules in place, so then people can look at them when we're vetting the project and different committee members and whatnot. We'll be able to make those.
So I'm in favor of definitely discussing it at the next meeting after you share that with us and you discuss with the people at town hall.
Yeah, I will. I will definitely. Tom will be joining me, and we're going. I want to make sure that the projects that aren't standing on shaky ground, their money is either already out the door to them, or if they need any more paper, if the finance director needs any more paperwork or any other things that is holding it up, would be able to have in place for that. That will be necessary to bring those projects out. And then these two projects that are, I think, kind of somewhat in question, or at least the high school project, I'll have information on. So does anybody else? Lynn, I see your hand up.
Yes, under the old business, you had 4 items there. Were all those in front of the council? And you told us the playground was on hold, but what about the other 3 items? Were they voted through?
Yes. So the high school track was voted through, but obviously, as we found out after the vote, didn't realize it kind of by accident. The way that they distributed, they were going to fund the project. It was different from our recommendation, so you can't do that. They also voted on the Norcross carriage house application, and then 2 weeks, that was on the April 13th, and then the April 27th town council meeting, they voted on the pickleball nets. And then the Pine Knoll Playground, which was also originally scheduled for April the 13th, was shelved temporarily because of those different reasons with DPW and the rec department. And then they also officially made official our withdrawal of those Heritage Park funds, the architectural design funds that we had approved over a year ago. So that was officially recorded as well at the council level. So that's been all the business that's gone towards them. So every application that we sort of kind of have up in the air has been approved except for Pine Knoll. And then the other thing I plan on maybe bringing back in June is what we want to do about the second phase of the Bark Park, because I'd like to perhaps have an idea of where the committee would like to go on that, because if you look at the meeting schedule, I don't expect us to have any meetings in July and August. I know, with everybody's, opening up with COVID, if you're getting your vaccine, you might want to be, going to places with your family and friends. And normally there isn't really meetings like that in July or August anyway. So I was going to kind of give the committee those 2 months, and then we return back in September for a meeting before our next funding cycle starts October 1. So that's sort of kind of a composite of just all the different things that we'll be kind of trying to finish up for June. The Bark Park, looking at those 2 projects that we kind of have, or really just the high school project that we'll have. And then also I'll update the committee on just sort of a draft master plan. And I'll send the Acton, along with the information with Stewart, I'll send the that sort of example from the town of Acton, because I think I read through it. I think it's going to be really helpful. Okay, with that, does anybody else have, we pretty much ran through the agenda. Does anybody else have any more things that they would like to bring up? So hearing none, I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
I'll make a motion to adjourn, please.
Okay, do I hear a second? Francis seconded. Okay, so I will go in order of roll call how I see it on the screen here. Ralph?
Yes.
Francis?
Yes.
Tom?
Yes.
Lynn?
Yes.
And then I think we might have lost some people here. I see Brian, we're voting on adjourning.
So then we go into, so then I go.
All right, I'm not able to hear him, and I'm not sure if Tony is here. either, but
Sorry, I dropped.
that's okay. We're voting on adjourning.
Yeah, I'm for that.
Okay. All right. So that is everyone that I can see that's present at this moment. I know we had Tony, so, and I'm a yes as well. So with that, we have adjourned unanimously. So those will be the couple different things. Our next meeting is the first Tuesday, which is June the 3rd, 6:30. And then that'll be our last meeting before the summer. Then we'll go on a hiatus. So with that, everyone have a great rest of your evening.
You too. Thank you.
Good night, everyone.
Bye, John. Thank
Bye.
you.
Definitely. Take care.
Bye, everybody.